All right. Let's make sure that everyone is live. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-salatu as-salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi at-tayyibin wa-tahirin. Wa radin ashabihi ajma'in bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli waj'alni waziran min ahli Harun akhi ushdud bihi azri. Amma ba'd. Let's just make sure that the link is the same and that all the friends know that we're on again, inshallah. And if the link needs to be sent, I don't know. It's, I think, the same link, inshallah. All right, alhamdulillah, alameen. Thank you for your patience. So in regards to our talk for tonight, the intention is to speak about the title that was the original title for last night's talk, but we had changed the subject of the talk last night, where we began speaking on the psycho-spiritual, even the physical challenges of itikaf, since it was a midway check-in point for the friends. And so I thought it to be appropriate, as I felt that it would be wise to address that matter, that challenges occur internally, physically, not only physically, but also mentally, and not only mentally, but also emotionally, and not only emotionally, but also spiritually. And so we addressed that matter to some degree last night. What I'd like to do, inshallah, for tonight is to continue with the actual topic that I had intended last night, but we're going to begin for today. And perhaps the more practical element of that in terms of guided meditations will be for tomorrow. So there's a few guided meditations I have in mind for working with each center that I think after unveiling or bringing out this an appreciation of what I mean by the centers, then we'll be more ready for some kind of application that way. So just perhaps as a basic guided meditation to get everyone more centered, let us just enter a 5-minute or so Muraqaba. And what we can attempt to do here is we can imagine, so this Muraqaba will be a Muraqaba of imagining that you have just visualize that you've just finished your ritual prayer. So the friends here, they know this because we do this after every prayer, this particular Muraqaba. So inshallah, I wish to introduce this here. So for those who pray and have been praying the ritual prayer, there's multiple postures of the Muslim prayer for those who are not familiar, coming to the final where we're sitting, facing the sacred direction, the Qibla. We are reciting certain formulas that kind of all of which have been revealed and inspired to the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then at the end of it, when we're in the particular posture called julus, it's a sitting posture, which is not the cross-legged posture, but it's the sitting, but the other form of the posture where one's feet are, where one is kind of mounted, on one's hips, kind of more or less hard for me to explain right now. But in any case, if you imagine you're coming out of the prayer, what we say to exit the prayer is Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and we look to our right shoulder, and for some even further to the right, to that direction, and then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and to the shoulder and up. Right? So that's what I mean by that directionality. Some will look at the shoulder and this way. So imagine that you've just come out. The point of this Muraqaba is to keep the heart open. So the intention here is to keep the heart open to Allah's presence and what you've received from the ritual prayer. For although you've exited the prayer, where has Allah went? Where is Allah? He's still present. Although we've exited from the sacred prophetic form of this prayer, of the ritual prayer, in which we received the divine presence, the mercy and the bounties of the divine presence. So imagine and visualize that you're there and that you've just given salams. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Stay here for a moment. Try to feel the sacred, physical, and subtle presence of your sitting place in the salat and its sacredness with you, your connection to the ground and your body as you have come out of the ritual prayer. Feel the specialness of this moment because it is a new space and it's a new time as you have come back from your Lord for a Salatul Mi'raj al-Mu'min, where the ritual prayer is a spiritual ascent, is the spiritual ascent of the believer. So in that ascent that now you have descended from in verticality of the salat, you have given salam to the horizontality of your being, of your experience. Keep this heart open to what you are still receiving from Allah, from above. As you bask in the merciful glory of Allah's mercy and His peace, as Assalamu alaikum, Ya salam. There is no effort here. Simply relax and stay open and continue to receive. Ya salam. Breathe in and out this divine peace. Ya salam. Feel that peace from the forehead or the blessings of salat. Give those blessings, share those blessings as as-salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace of God be upon you and the mercy of God. May the peace of God be upon you and the mercy of God. This is what you have to offer as the Khalifatullah out of sacred prayer, sacred prophetic prayer, as a servant of the All-Merciful, as an Abd of Ar-Rahman. Ya Salam. Continue to simultaneously receive and give. As-salat was-salam. You only have two functions as a servant of the All-Merciful. To receive and to give. When we open ourselves to the salat and the salam of the prophetic presence, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim, we are secure in receiving and giving. Your Assalamu alayka ya ayyuhan nabi in your julus is responded to, in your sitting position in the prayer is responded to by Allah as He gives you those blessings. And that original salam is completed with your giving salams to all aspects of your being and your existence, of the horizontal dimension of your being. As you receive continuously from the vertical dimension of your being, in the most beautiful prophetic form of the salat, as-salat al-mi'raj al-mu'min. Continue feeling as you are in your visualization and in your meditation of very similar blessings of intimacy with the Nafath al-Rahman, the breath of the All-Merciful, with each and every breath that you experience in the salat, in the ritual prayer. Keep the heart open. And as we exit, continue to bring this to this realm, to the realm of your own existence, the horizontality of your being. And so you fill your verticality and horizontality with a divine peace. As-salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Alhamdulillah. All right, inshallah, we'll begin now with the didactic. So this will probably be more of a didactic, inshallah. So those who are taking notes or who intend to take notes, maybe this will be a session where we take notes. Inshallah, alhamdulillah. All right, so the title of the talk is the interrelation of, or the, yes, the interrelation of the three centers of the soul, of the human soul, or the three centers of the human soul, the interrelation of the aql, the mindful intellect, of the qalb, the spiritual heart, and the sir, the divine secret of the inmost self. What do I mean by this? Well, the first thing I wanted to mention was, if you recall the passage by the commentary of the Shaykh al-Alawi Qaddasallahu Sirruhu, who mentions the mushahada and Muraqaba, and then, I'm sorry, Muhasaba, Muraqaba, and Mushahada. We can see, and as I alluded to, these three spiritual practices, one comes from the other, one can say. So one leads to the other, that if we place the practice of self-observation, observing ourselves, in the context of iman and taqwa, observing our actions, or what have you, observing ourselves, what we've done in the past, what we may do in the future, our actions, even in the present moment. And we'll get to that probably by tomorrow, what I mean by these past, future, and present moment practices. That's maybe for tomorrow, maybe we'll begin that for today also. But the more we do this consciously, we begin awakening this subtle center of the mindful intellect, what I call the mindful intellect. So we begin awakening, we begin awakening the mindful intellect, which is the first conscious, spiritually and religiously conscious center of the human soul. That there's another center that's already present. It's more unconscious. So that is the Nafs, what we can call the Nafsani consciousness. That is the natural default of every human soul. In that when the ruh, coming from the divine origin of the spirit, touches the human body or is mingled with the body, we have the awakening of this interface of consciousness that we call the nafsani, or the nafsani consciousness. In general, the human soul itself, but in particular, the consciousness of the ego self. So this consciousness is by default more or less unconscious. It's unconscious of its real self, of what it really is. And in its awareness of its connection to the human body, it develops tendencies, desires, likes and dislikes, aversions, that create its identity, more or less. And so it is both, one could say, a predominantly unconscious center, but also a conscious center, especially as we begin aging and we enter adolescence and adulthood. The integration of our most primal emotions, interactions as a child into the age of balagha and the age of taklif, according to sacred law. So the age of speech, and also the age of the like the moral burden on the human soul, when we are responsible before God for our actions. In this context, although this is now an individuated ego self that is obviously conscious and is able to do things and responsible or supposed to be, from a deeply spiritual standpoint, this center of human consciousness, or this stage of human consciousness, is quite unconscious. It is unconscious of what it really is. It interacts in the world, in the dunya, and with itself, and has an outer self and a kind of inner self, has an image of itself and its roles in life as an outer self, and it has an inner self of how it is being perceived by itself and by others. And in this inner self is a lot of psychological movements, right? So internal stimuli of emotions, of thoughts, of a lot of fears, etc., of a lot of hopes, a lot of joy, all kinds of emotions. This is what we could call here, from a deeply spiritual point of view, a partially conscious, probably the best phrase, a partially conscious self or center of the human soul. The more conscious it becomes, the more matured it becomes, and this is only possible when the mindful intellect, or when the intellect is awakened, which is, you could say, this, which one could then say is the second center of the human soul, but from the point of view of spiritual awakening, it is the first center of the human soul in this model. So it's important to understand this. Now, how does the intellect awaken? Basically, when we begin when we are more conscious about our habits, about our actions, about the repercussions for whatever reason, whether something happened in life, whether we were imprisoned and then we become more aware of the consequences of our actions, or whether that's an extreme case, but whether we were reprimanded, or we went against the law and there was some consequence, some penalty, whatever it is, or whether it's your parents or society or your culture, the conditioning of that, of your personal experience, of certain things that need to be done a certain way. When our inner drives confront, outer norms, the intellect awakens on some level. Right. So, even if this intellect is not fully awakened, it begins awakening. A higher form of this is when we have a moral conscience and we strive to abide by intellectual norms. When there's a sense of ethics just from even an intellectual perspective, from a purely intellectual perspective. A more encompassing awakening is when this is combined with revealed teachings, with the teachings that come from revealed religion, which come from revealed religion. When these two come, Hadia, you have to go. When these two combine, we have more of an awakening of intellect. And because now the intellect is not only being objective about itself and about the norms that it can see are more conscious and harmless and beneficial behaviors, it begins to be aware as an intellect of God's understanding of, and God's awareness and God's will of how we should conform to the divine norms. This begins opening the intellect more. And so this center then is more fully awakened when we begin self-reflecting and attempting to integrate ourselves into a revealed way, a revealed path, a prophetic way. When we begin using our intelligence to conform our behaviors, our tendencies, our drives, our desires, reshaping our actions to conform to the divine norm and the prophetic way, we are using our intellect in a fitra'i way, in a better way, in a way that is more conforming to the divine nature, what can be called your fitra, which is the divine nature or the intended nature of the divine will for your human soul. Fitratullah, to use the precise, Arabic term in the Quranic verse in Surah Al-Rum, for example, Fitratullah. It's not just fitra, it's Fitratullah, right? The image or the reflection of the divine nature upon the human soul. This reflection or this originality of the soul intuitively knows how it should be responding or reacting. But we awaken more to this as the intellect awakens to itself and becomes more of the predominant conscious center of your behavior, of your living, of your being, in all the ways we've mentioned. This is mindful intellect. This affects our body, our habits. When we know we have to go on a diet to lose weight, we are becoming more mindful of what we eat, the calories that we put in, the amount of energy that we expend, our expenditure, our energy expenditure. This is intentional. It's conscious. Any intentional act is connecting with mindful intellect. When that act is also rooted in faith, it begins connecting more with the awakening of spiritual heart, the qalb, which would be technically the third center of the human soul, but from a spiritual standpoint, really the second center, because aql is first from that angle, from the angle of spiritual awakening, right? But in terms of the dimensions of the human being, you could say it is the third center. But to understand the two schemas, the partially conscious or the unconscious center of nafs, the nafsani consciousness, then the aqli consciousness, right? The intellectual consciousness or the intellecting consciousness or the mindful intellecting consciousness, and then the spiritual heart consciousness. Let me say a few words about the spiritual heart, the qalb. When I say the heart, I do not just mean emotion. Emotion is a part of it, but really an outer part. The spiritual heart is the psycho-spiritual center of your being. If you imagine that on one side there is the divine presence that breathes in the ruh or the spirit into the human body or the human form, when it hits the end of that form, this whole trajectory of going outwards or to the other side is what creates a nafsan, or it creates a nafs, human consciousness. And if you make a spectrum of this, a lot of unconsciousness happens at the end of that side, where the momentum is more of the consciousness, just supporting and reinforcing the identity of the outer form. But as this consciousness begins to somehow become more aware of its real source in the divine, the center of its consciousness or being begins to awaken to its origin in the divine, that this is actually where it came from. It begins to be even more self-aware. This takes both intellectual understanding or intellectual certitude and faith, especially iman, faith. Some may arrive to a kind of ilmul yaqeen or a certainty of knowing by philosophical proofs about the nature of existence and about God. They may investigate this and become certain that they do come from somewhere else, that there's something, that their nature is unseen and goes beyond this seen realm. There's multiple approaches that can bring you to this awareness, this certitude of mind, of intellect. This is really the intellect being active, a kind of aql fa'il, in a partial sense, and not in, I don't want to, this is not the exact meaning in the traditional philosophical sense of the meaning of intellect as a fully active intellect. The philosophers really mean a realized intellect, but it is an awakened and an active intellect. It's much more mindful and active. It's an aql fa'il, at this point, because it is being used properly as a tool, as an instrument of our consciousness. We begin reflecting on our experiences and objects around us, the world, along with taxonomy and naming things, distinguishing one object from another, seeing their similarities, a genus, a species, kingdoms, etc., that we can analyze with the furqan of intellect, the discernment of intellect. It begins to be even more self-aware and inquire into its own self, the nature of itself, where it came from. This, for some seekers who have a strongly intellectual center, is enough to bring them to ilmul yaqeen, a certainty and knowledge of their reality going beyond this realm. But for most human souls, they need the element of faith. And in fact, iman or faith, it goes even beyond ilmul yaqeen. It's connected to what we could call ainul yaqeen, a witnessing of certainty, a tasting of it by direct experience, even if that is weak and subtle for many souls. Iman is already a higher participation in the divine mysteries, if you will, if you want to use this language. It is more of a precursor to ma'rifah than is just intellectual certainty. Although intellectual certitude and the mind can support and strengthen iman, and it's really the purpose of the intelligence to do this. But both intellect and faith, my point being, is what is needed with the practice of revelation, of following revealed religion, revealed teachings, and the spiritual work that's being done that then begins to awaken more and more of the spiritual heart that's been touched by our iman, and that we return to in ritual prayer or in fasting, breaking fast, feeding the poor. This touches our heart in a way that goes beyond just emotions. It may feel good, but something else is awakened, quickened, something that is fulfilling, that comes from the whole of us, something of a wholesomeness that's beyond just emotions. This is awakening of spiritual heart. When this heart is fully opened, it is fully opened or sustainably opened by spiritual practices, right? So this spiritual heart is this second, technically, human center for spiritual awakening versus intellect, mindful intellect, and the second is spiritual heart. As one could probably see, one can, and as the point is being made, that something is awakened, this means that if it needs to be awakened, it was shut. And if it was shut, it was because it was eclipsed and one was ignorant of or ignored or was unaware of its reality, of its subtlety as a latifa, a subtleness of consciousness and energy in our soul. Because we were absorbed in, identified with, overwhelmed by the tendencies, our conditioned unconsciousnesses, our ghafla, right? What one of my teacher calls the ghafil soul, Ghafil, the ghafil, the one who is in a state of, or even station of, heedlessness. Right? So this heedlessness of nafs veils and eclipses the sun, if you will, by symbology, by symbolism of the spirit, which reflects itself upon the mirror that is the heart, the spiritual heart. And our mujahada with our nafs, due to with the help of the intellect, is what helps our tazkiyatun nafs. We purified the nafs and its tendencies in our soul and its conditioned habits. We break it a bit and we purify it so that we begin awakening, so that we begin using the intellect even more and eventually awakening a more subtle center in the human being, which is the spiritual heart. And we struggle in this. We go back and forth. Certain actions or certain events reinforce tendencies or bring upon other tendencies that veil the translucency of the center of this subtle kind of center of human consciousness that is the spiritual heart. Sometimes we open, and as we know, we close. We open, we close. Oh, I got it. I lost it. So we feel this a lot in spiritual practice. So that's just a taste of that, or we feel that we're in a state of istiqama and then we lose it. We're in a state of steadfastness with our practices, and then something happens in life, or we experience an emotional state, and that's it. It's done. This is the overpowering of our unconscious and conscious egoic drives on the more supra-conscious, elements of the human soul. With practice, sincerity, virtue, purificatory exercises, service, selfless service, all kinds of spiritual practices, the regularity in your ritual prayer, with the attitude of sincerity, of ikhlas, of taqwa, of being transparent with ourselves, with humility, in our muhasaba practice that activates intellect, we begin to be more available and more present and more open to the possibility of spiritual openness of the heart. Once the heart is sufficiently open by the grace of God that's always active in this whole process, the fadl and the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we may have glimpses of the spirit, of the ruh, which is, or I would say here, the sir, the divine secret within, which is the apex of the ruh, its summit, one can say, in us, God's secret with us. We begin to have lama'at, or glimmers or flashes of this matter. And the more that we are engaged in adhkar, or the remembrances of God, and the methodic remembrance of God, we tap into an internal energy that comes from the spirit, connected to the divine permission by the revealed practices that Allah has sent, that God has sent through his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that has been passed on to those who inherit these practices. This divine energy of spirit infuses the heart and opens it at times, and we feel spiritual states or spiritual emotions of joy, of trust, of even humility, of patience. Right? These spiritual emotions help nourish the spiritual heart. But you see how they're not just psychological emotions. They come from a higher place and they infuse. And sometimes in spiritual gatherings, there may even be moments of wajd, or ecstasy, even physical, but spiritual ecstasy of the soul that touches its higher and more powerful dimensions and just lights up for a moment. These ahwals, or spiritual states, are the influx of ruh, of spirit, into the heart and then into the mind and the body, actually. And so one may sometimes see these states in others, or even in oneself, and they may stay for a few moments, or an hour, or a day, or a week, or a month, or months, and then will pass. They're transient states, what sometimes in beautiful Sufi poetry we call the breezes of love, or the breezes of intimacy, of the divine love here being symbolic of the energy of spirit that Allah has commanded to quicken the heart and the mind and the soul. This intimacy with God. The more we are with one who has been awakened and opened to the presence of spirit, to the divine secret, the more we receive from them that opening, and the more that affects our soul and our being, and helps the transformation of the heart and of the soul. And this more or less is what one could say, like an overview or a spectrum of these three centers, essential centers of the human soul, of spiritual awakening. And one can see in this that one relates with the other and one affects the other. That if, and the more subtle one is, or the more subtle a center is, it can be overwhelmed or eclipsed by that which our soul is more accustomed to, or is more attracted to, because of the momentum of our experiences in life. But the more we become open to that which is more subtle, the more we begin realizing that that subtlety of awareness encompasses what we thought we were, and it reveals itself. It opens itself to us, and it encompasses us. And so, in effect, this locus of awareness of what we deem to be our center is the same center, but it's a center that becomes purified and then awakened and then opened, and then purified more or opened more and quickened and so forth. But it's the same locus of awareness, right? It's about what we identify with, what we believe we are. You know, am I my mistake that's in my mind all the time, that I'm a failure? Does this determine me? If it does, this is nafsani consciousness confused on the level of intellect consciousness. And it hasn't found the proper vibrations of energy and the tawfiq, and hasn't opened itself up to the divine aid to move beyond this, right? For example. Right? So I wanted to emphasize their interrelationship, that one affects the other, and that when one is open, for example, on the level of the heart, that opening and that energy and that awareness and that presence and that grace can be expressed on more formal levels or more outer levels of our existence. So when we have heart openings, our heart presence, for example, with God can express itself on the 7 limbs of the body as we speak of them in Islamic spirituality. When we're heart opened, we can look through our physical eyes with our heart, rather than just as a nafs, right? Rather than just as Hassan, looking through and seeing somebody. One can look as one's presence with God at someone from their heart, or just simply being more mindfully present and in engaging in things. That's another frequency or vibration or awareness or interaction or relation with things when you're more mindful, rather than when you're, heedless and you're responding from your conditioning to things. But to be there and to do that means to taste and sit in that center more, to abide there more. And then the more that we can bring the heart out through the 7 channels that simultaneously can obstruct and block the heart from further awakening, and or be modalities in which the heart can express itself through, which then, when we express our heart through our listening, our ears, through our seeing, our gaze, through our speech, our tongue, when we speak with more presence and conscious awareness, when we speak with adab, for example, or when we speak beautifully, this is a much different modality of consciousness and even energy than when we speak from impulse, or when we're angry, or foul language having to do with impulse, and from some other state of anger or hurt. But when we speak from presence, this is a whole nother matter of its own effect on our limb, but on our whole being. It reinforces our embodiment of presence in this realm. And not only that, it brings benefit, barakah, benefit to that which is outside us. Just the presence of a saint purifies, detoxifies, human pollution, the pollution of the nafsani consciousness on the environment, just by them walking in areas. It displaces the darknesses that have accumulated as residues by their light. If you are walking with presence, if you are reflecting on God's signs with presence. And so the more that we do this and the more that we embody what we are tasting as our heart presence with God, or as our mindfulness on the level of intellect, the more this reinforces our and transforms our behavior. So you see how they're mutually reinforcing. But when we struggle with that, one is always predominating over the other, right? And so the heart, or the center of our being, is taqallib, or is oscillating. The qalb is taqallib, oscillating towards its heedlessness, its unconsciousness, its normal patterns of the conditioning of impulses and aversions, or it is beginning to conform to higher intuitions, more subtle intuitions, more pure thoughts, more beautiful feelings, more wholesome intuitions and waridat that come from Allah or from the angels, from higher agencies that are connected to the centers of our consciousness, of our being. Right? So I wanted to lay out this kind of schema so that there's just an understanding from a conceptual standpoint. What I wanted to try to do now, or at least mention, that itikaf, or spiritual retreat, it is a beautiful time to relate with and work with these centers. It's a most beautiful time. At the least, you have already made an intention to come to itikaf or to spiritual retreat, or if you have a regular spiritual routine that you stick to every day, you wake up and you have intentionality. You're already awakening intellect at the center of intellect, mindful intellect. That I have to do this, and in this way, it's time for me to brush my teeth in the name of God, or to benefit my own health. It's okay to, of course, some of these are so routine. It's just you do these things, but there is an intention. It's a good habit to bring intention back, to be conscious of intention. You don't have to say it, but you can have multiple intentions for an act. There's a beautiful book called The Book of Intentions, which is a beautiful book by a sage and saint of the Alawiya Sufi Islamic tradition. Beautiful book, The Book of Intentions. If you read that carefully, it will transform your life. As a Muslim, it will integrate not only why to do certain acts, but it will open your heart to an awareness of unseen realities, and will bring more into your reality. You'll in order to have a living experience of the 6 articles of faith. In some way, shape, or form, some of the intentions will open you to recognizing that. For example, and I'm probably improvising now from my read of the book, which I like to return to yearly. For example, I have certain books I like to return to, and that's one of them. I like to at least skim read or read portions of it at a certain time of the year. So by improvisation, may not be found there, so don't try to open the book and oh, you said this, it wasn't there. Improving here, right? From my own application. So before I forget that application, let me come to that example. Yes. That when I pray, I understand that because I'm remembering Allah, that the angels will be present. My prayer attracts angels, and they take this to God, and it's written in my record. One of my intentions for prayer is to keep angelic presences in my home or wherever I pray, and for them to be with me. For example, when you recite Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne, there's an angel that's assigned to you. having awareness of this, having an intentionality where you are aware of this. This is one example, where then there's an intimacy or more of a sensitivity to angels. Right? You begin to have, and these intentions, as you repeat them in your heart and mind, they begin to operate in your creative imagination, your spiritualized imagination, which is integrated into your being. Not that you're making this up, you're opening yourself to what is reality, what you were closed to due to your attention on that which you can only see and feel and the physical five senses, and other internal stimuli that reinforce the ego self and its own desires and ways to do things and to think. You begin opening yourself to more metaphysical or spiritual realities. Right? And likewise, I can think about that if I have certain negative thoughts, what am I attracting? I'm not attracting angels, if we want to stay there on this kind of symbolism. But it's not just, when I use the word symbolism, I don't intend abstractions or just intellectual abstractions. Symbols are real modes of participation with higher realities. They vehicle them, right? When we use terms like symbolic, they're like a reverberation of a higher ontology, if I want to get technical and academic with you. Right? Which is, by the way, as academic as I will get, like that wordy ontology. So if I sounded smart, I did my job. Which is the study of being, and ontology has to do with being. But that's just one example. Brushing my teeth because as an intention, as a sacred intention, I place the intention consciously and I revisit it, because so that I help my body, the health of my physical body. That's one intention, because it was the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to clean the teeth, because I want to, if I'm speaking with someone, I don't want to harm them, and so forth. So you see, a compounded intentions for a particular act amplifies its benefit and also awakens more presence. Right? So it's one of, they say for the Ba'alawiya, I'm not Ba'alawi by method, but I love them and I respect them. It's one of their secrets of amplifying intentions. Because then in the akhirah, you are rewarded for all of them. So you have amplified by one act, you've amplified all possibility of the reward for one act. Right? And if you maintain these intentions, if you look at them, you will be on some level in your intellectual center and your heart center. You're awakening this as you perform actions, right? I practice, for example, I do body sensing yoga, in the mornings at times, like here in Ittikaf as well. My intention is also for my physical health and well-being, and for sitting here for long periods of time because of my joints, but it's also my intention is that it's one element of my mujahada on the nafs, my struggle with the nafs and the body mind, so that I strive with it. So I should not say struggle, but strive. Really, I mean striving with the body mind. So it keeps it restrained a little bit. If you do this contemplatively with this intention, you've done a lot of work actually. And if you're doing your practices, you are more coming to your center now, ready to awaken your heart, or stay more heart open, as you've now restrained and you've done some exercises on the nafs. Now you're more available energetically and spiritually and emotionally for being in the heart center, right? If you're doing your adhkar and these things. If you're not, it's still a beautiful experience to do yoga. There's a sense of peacefulness, of relaxation, of a kind of looseness, a lightness, and even a flow of energy that may be felt, even more if you do things like qigong or energy work. This is more body structure work aligned with spinal alignment and your breath, the prana, which has its own modality of healing. So you can stay on that level, but you see if your intentions are more subtle, it opens you to more subtle levels, right? With the adhkar, and now you're more available for adhkar. Now I can sit more still and I can do dhikr. These are intentions. And then you begin bearing its fruit, right? As you feel more khushu in your dhikr or in your prayer, because your body is supple, right? And you're not resisting as sometimes you normally do for the first 4 minutes in your muraqaba due to tightness in your legs or something like that, or your knees. You've done your stretch work, your body work. That's out of the way. So the nafsani resistance, body-mind resistance that occurs at the beginning of all practices, even the ritual prayer, can be worked on before, so that you're more heart available or available for the heart. So that's one example, right? And so that's taking that in terms of intentions. So to let me, in this context, outline some, presence practices, and we will more or less end with this, but I may introduce at the end here certain gates of contemplation, especially in itikaf, that you all have already experienced, I've already hinted at, that will be helpful. But in terms of presence practices, right, which those practices now, if we understand, awaken the intellect, right, or allow us to use the mindful intellect and awaken the heart. So at least these two things happening, meaning these exercises will allow us to use the mindful intellect and bring us to a position of potentially awakening the spiritual heart, especially in contexts like itikaf. We have, I've broken this down to body, mind, heart practices. These are more or less, muhasaba practices of both self-observation that are very beneficial. So the first, let's start with the body. So body sensing, right? If you have done mindfulness and sensing of the body, you can use those practices as a starting point. And you can bring in a kind of sensing of the body to the postures of your ritual prayer as you pray in itikaf, in a spiritual retreat, where you have much more time to feel into postures and your positions in your ibadah, in your worship. You have much more time to take a longer time in sajda, which means to feel Allah's presence, but as a intention of concentrating to sense your forehead on the ground, to contemplate your humility before Allah as a dhikr of Allah, which is a body sensing exercise, right? The intention is for the ibadah and the dhikr of Allah, and as a means of further helping you concentrate on the presence of Allah. You are in body sensing where you're absorbed enough that there are no other thoughts, there are no stray thoughts. You're absorbed and you're remembering Allah. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. So Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. Right? Your forehead is on the ground, so your nose is touching on the ground also, which is my preference. And this sensing leads to a kind of absorption, which you can even name humility. The clay touches clay, earth touches earth. Nurun ala nur in terms of humility, absorption in this. Fana, annihilation of the nafs in this matter. We have humbled our noble intellect, and we are serving Allah as we do prostration. See all these thoughts even and sensing, connecting all this to humble submissiveness, khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Body sensing, the ritual prayer is a beautiful support or rather body sensing is a beautiful support of concentration in your ritual prayer. And it can be used as a kind of practice, especially, for example, Salatul Tasbih. These are supports of contemplation that awaken presence on all of these levels or centers of the human soul: the intellect, mindful intellect, spiritual heart, and even spirit or sir. This is the point of them. Another beautiful example is taking your time in your ablution. You have all the time in the world in itikaf, right? And I've given these talks over the years, and so you might ask, why am I giving this now halfway into itikaf? I would always give talks like this on the first day of itikaf, over all these years, but with the hope that all of you have been practicing this, which most of you, alhamdulillah, have been. But as a reminder for you, and obviously for those who are online, right? Ablution. Take your time. Be present. Allow the coolness of the water that touches your skin, and as it flows, to just slow your mind down. Allow it to still your mind, because it does, because you're in immediate sensing if you're conscious and mindful. Feel that, and feel even apply the hadith that as the water flows, the sins flow off you from your limbs, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, tongue, your hands, your feet, right, etc. So the ritual ablution, the sensing there, becomes an amazing support for as a presence practice to awaken presence on the level of intellect, on the level of mindful intellect, and the spiritual heart. Contemplating God's presence as we purify ourselves outwardly and even inwardly in the ablution. It's a sunnah to remain silent as you perform ablution, practicing that as an intentionality, an intentional practice of silence, engaging with silence, noticing the silence as you do ablution. So let's stick with this body sensing. And I'll get to the gates of contemplation later, of prophetic contemplation later, which includes silence. And calling the adhan, listening to your own adhan, in subtly listening to how you feel as you call the adhan. When you're listening to somebody's adhan, listening and subtly just scanning yourself and staying open and listening and allowing the words and the beautiful sound of the adhan to fill the space of your soul. It's a sunnah to remain not only silent, but actually still when listening to the adhan. That is meditation practice. That's a sunnah. There's no better place than itikaf to actually really be present for adhan. It's a beautiful practice of contemplation, and it's very rewardable. And it goes straight as a lessening when you're centered into the spiritual heart. So it awakens your heart a little bit, and it can go straight into the spirit, right? Because the listening, subtle consciousness of listening is the first faculty of the ruh, where we listened first unto God. When he said, Alastu bi rabbikum, we heard his dhikr first, his mention first. And then we spoke, balash hidana. So listening, deep listening, contemplative listening, mindful listening, being fully present and open as a heart as you listen to someone, is a spiritual faculty. So you have all the time and especially space in itikaf to soak in the spaciousness of the silence that allows you to listen more to things, to nature, to things outside of you, and most importantly, to yourself. How you're listening to how you're feeling, listening to what you're sensing in your body at the present moment, listening to how you feel about what someone is saying, how you feel, not what they're saying, or not judging them, but what's happening in you. Listening to what you're about, how you're feeling, or what you are as you're about to say something to someone. Listening to how you're about to react, We're listening to subtle listening here, to the movements inside you of your nafs. Right. This is listening. This is a very subtle practice that one is awakened to the more you engage in spacious silence of itikaf or of any space of retreat. The more you plunge into the spaciousness of silence, the more sensitive you become to the noise, not just outside of you, but especially inside of you. Cultivating that silent listening for the adhan, for your own recitation of Quran, for your own recitation of adhkar, is an amazing spiritual practice. And you have this possibility in itikaf for these things. You might be asking, man, you should have said this at the beginning. Well, I have like over 10 years, for like 10 years straight. So, I mean, but I wanted to work my way up. So I hope, so my apologies if some of this is hitting home and you're like, oh, but inshallah, you can take it home with you, right? And you can look back and see how what I'm speaking of was actually happening. Most importantly, yes. So I did kind of say it, but I'm simply pointing out what was already happening in your experience. But now that you're more aware of it, you can tune into it more outside of this experience. The key to a successful life is really this very subtle listening and connecting this with Allah's presence. I'll get into that for tomorrow. Inshallah, bi'idhnillah. So that's body level. We touched slightly mind level and heart level, but in itikaf, in terms of these muhasaba practices, we spoke of body sensing and how you can relate or interact with that. We spoke, but in terms of the mind, reflecting on the verses of the Quran, their meanings, reading spiritual books and deeply reflecting on them, reflecting on spiritual conversations with the teacher, with the spiritual friends, in the setting especially of the suhbah of ihtikaf, right? And most importantly, reflecting on yourself and your own life and where you have come from, where you were, where you are now, and where you want to go. Right? Deep reflection, taking that into supplication. So all of this is also the muhasaba of the mind, observing your thoughts, ordering your thoughts, reflecting very deeply, awakening intellect even more, right? And connecting it with iman. Because why are we interested in where we are, where we were, and where we're heading? Because we're aware of akhirah. We are aware of our meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just self-help, right? It's to seek the divine help for our meeting with Allah, right? There's verses that speak of this, that for those who hope for their meeting with their Lord, right? In the Prophet is an amazing example, the best example for those who hope for the meeting of their Lord and who perform much dhikr, according to the verse. That's the verse. It's amazing, actually. That's like the whole path in like one verse, right? Inshallah, one day I'll write a spiritual text on that for the prophetic alchemy. It's a very beautiful verse. So coming to, because we're at the 1 hour and 8 minute mark, I want to just say a few more minutes. In terms of the heart, we can reflect on emotions, spiritual emotions, but most importantly, the Muraqaba practices. This is where the Muhasaba meets Muraqaba, right? And I'll say more about that for tomorrow night, and we'll have exercises actually, inshallah. And those will be fun, I think. Maybe not that fun, but they're always fun for me. Okay. So the Muraqaba practices, and you're engaging your heart as a believer in your ibadat. So you're tasting in your heart. When you're here in the space of barakah and you're absorbed in the silence, cultivating or awakening stillness, you will at some point enter your heart to take note of that, how that feels, what is its kind of energetic sense, we continue listening as a muhasaba to what that is, not just energetically, just what it is in terms of your sense of awareness of things, your sense of connection, how you're speaking, how you're holding yourself, right? All of this can from your muhasaba, it can teach you how to come back to the heart, because then you'll know very much so, because you're a master of your own unconsciousness, how you come out of it, right? So then you know how you act when you're like not in presence, right? And you know how you speak, and you know the kind of thoughts that you have or the feelings that are arising, like in terms of emotions. So finally, let me say that in this context, there's 4 gates that we already spoke about, the 4 essential, practices or foundations of spiritual practice in itikaf that we spoke about in the first talk or the second talk, which is solitude, silence, hunger, and wakefulness. So uzla, which is solitude, silence, which is samt, hunger, which is Ju apostrophe, I guess. What's that? Joa. All right, so that's how you would say it, right? Is Ju apostrophe fine for like English?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, because it has that. Okay, fine. Yeah, all right. Okay. You guys win. All right. So hunger, right? And then we have wakefulness, yaqadha, or my preference, yaqaza. I'd like to emphasize the za, la, right? In my Persian Pakistani, right? Like, to my Urdu, Hindi, or Punjabi sense, right? Okay. So these 4, right? Now, what I like to, I like to remodify their terms. So I use solitude in a contemplative sense. The purpose of solitude, there's many purposes, and we spoke about them. I read a commentary on them. There's outward and inward purposes for the solitude, but it brings you contemplatively and meditatively. The purpose of it really is to bring you to a point of stillness, right? We put ourselves into solitude, into confinement, to awaken some inner sense of stillness in us. Not necessarily just be physically still, but inner stillness. This is a gateway into heart presence, into our presence. So try to notice that as you're in solitude, right? And this will reinforce the benefits of solitude for you. And notice, by contrast, in your muhasaba, how you move away from that, your movements of nafs, in contrast to stillness. Right? Silence is self-explanatory. It's not just becoming silent, but also noticing that that's important. Because when you awaken a listening presence in the silence, you begin to notice your noise of your thoughts and your reactions. All that's very important, but this is only possible when we begin noticing that ever-present spacious silence that's always present, that we can connect with, especially in retreat, in solitude, right? This awakens just existentially, being in silence. Eventually, the mind slows down and just relaxes a bit. It stills. It helps silence. In other words, helps still the mind. Just by noticing the silence that's already there more and more. It starts, oh. It's exactly what happens. All right. It's exactly what happens. So believe me, I know, because I have a very blue mind. So when I notice the silence more, oh, that's cool. Oh, wow, I'm gone. I'm sucked into the dark hole, the black hole of the spaciousness of silence, which is an opening to the spiritual heart. It's frequency, it's vibration. You thought that the vibration and movement of the mind was strong enough. Once you notice the subtle galaxy that is the heart, just get sucked in like the black hole. And that encompasses. This is what I mean by the subtle opening. It's always there, but you have to get there again. You have to notice it again. That, very important. And in terms of the last two gates of prophetic practice, of spiritual practices, which is hunger, I'll maybe say more. I know we're running out of time. I'm sorry, but hunger and then wakefulness. Hunger as an outward practice is very, very important. We're engaging with it in fasting, right? Where the pang of hunger, connect this to the body sensing. I've already mentioned this in the Ramadan talks. You can go back to those at the beginning of Ramadan. Like I did a whole PowerPoint kind of presentation on that as well. And I mentioned this, but cultivating a prophetic diet where you continue to have some element of hunger pangs in which you eat not to your fill, but halfway, somewhere in between being still pretty hungry and feeling that you've almost had your fill. And at some point, you don't have to engage that practice even in itikaf, even after breaking fast. Sure, you can go back later and have food, alhamdulillah. But actually, when you break fast and you have your meal, give it a shot. Try to do that. Don't be afraid. There's still going to be food. If there's no food, just let me know. I'll order more food. It's no biggie. But just what occurs there, the return to a hunger sense. This is a very powerful practice, a very powerful ascetic practice, not something that you have to always do, but it does something. First of all, you'll notice that it's healthy for you, it's healthier. But also it allows you, especially for people who have indigestion like myself, and like that's an old term. There's acid reflux and it's called these other things now, but it used to be called indigestion about 40 years ago. 30 years ago, it's a more apt term, actually, indigestion, where your digestion is not appropriate, it's not functioning well. You will notice when you do this, when you stay more sensorially hungry, where you have some hunger pangs, you'll notice what kind of foods and how much food will cause you bloating and not. Right? You'll notice more when you're about to overeat. Connecting these sensings with your prayers, having a nice, ruku, coming back up, being able to speak aloud if you're a man and you're leading prayer, not having problems. I mean, like, I'm not saying that, of course, I want you to have your fill to some extent, right? I'm not saying don't kill yourself here. You go back, you meet your mother or somebody, or spouse, like, so what did he do to you? Oh my goodness, right? No, I don't mean that. But there's something very precious because it awakens a more subtle listening to the body. You can heal yourself entirely if you learn to listen. Wallahi al-azim. Haqq. But you have to do these practices. These are prophetic practices. Right? To believe me, you can even eat bad still. I don't want to give you that cheat code, but you can eat bad if you like certain foods, but you have to have the mujahada on yourself then still, and you have to listen. But the more you listen, you'll probably end up eating better because you begin to listen to not only your stomach, but how your body feels, how you feel energetically, how your mind feels, right? So this is all under the category of hunger, jua. I said it properly?
Yeah.
Jua.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, jua. I tried. Okay.
I just don't want to confuse people with think you're talking about Jews.
I am not talking about Jews here. I love Jews. I love all human beings. Right. Alhamdulillah. But in any case, so the Arabic word jua, it means hunger, right? The inner aspect of hunger is emptiness, right? So the contemplative aspect is emptiness. So this is really what we're trying to facilitate and awaken, but it's not really a practice. So if you practice enough stillness and especially silence, my favorite all-encompassing practice is actually silence. because it leads to all these things I'm talking about, how to listen very subtly. You had to be still enough to observe. You have to be still enough in your mind and heart as you awaken intellect, that center of intellect, to be mindful and observe. This is only possible when the mind is more stilled, right? So you have to be still enough to observe. So I connect contemplative stillness with self-observation and witnessing. And I connect silence with listening. When you're still enough and silent enough, you begin listening. The inner ear of the heart opens wide. And you begin listening to yourself and to others. If you really want to figure out what people really mean when they're speaking, right? There's body language cues, but also, energetically, if you're listening, you know what people are saying. That's kind of scary, right? But this is even a skill set that like investigators use in these things. It's just these are applications of mindful listening, but it's more than just mindful. I did not know this term. I was naturally doing this because I had already applied it from prophetic practice. Then I came upon these words later. But just inner listening opens you, and all that's not important. The most important thing is you need to listen to your own self, right? Because Allah will ask you about that. I gave you the inner ear of the heart. I even awakened it, and you weren't listening to your own self. Ittaqallah wa yu'allimakumullah, as Allah says. Have conscious awareness of Allah. Activate your mindful intellect and awaken your spiritual heart. Ittaqallah wa yu'allimakumullah. And as you do this, I will teach you inner contemplative listening and witnessing, and that will teach you what you need to know. And that will be my guidance for you. That's a beautiful meaning of that verse. Ittaqallah wa yu'allimakumullah. The more conscious awareness of Allah that you have, that feeling sense and that intuitive knowing sense, that contemplative listening sense of the awakened heart of taqwa, teaches you, guides you. Very, very important. So these two things, stillness and silence, will lead to a natural emptying of nafs, so emptiness. It leads to purifying and emptying yourself of yourself. And then wakefulness, or what I would call in contemplation, because this is more physical wakefulness, but the purpose is spiritual openness. What occurs naturally, then don't try to force it. Let these two last things occur by themselves, right? Let them occur by themselves. Right? When you become aware of a clenched fist, you're like, wow, there's something, I'm feeling like a lot of resistance and tightness. Oh, my hand is tight. Okay. So naturally, like, you open it then. Same thing. When you're still enough for periods of time and you're silent enough, and stillness, I don't just mean physical stillness. I'm talking about awakening an inner sense of stillness from all the practices, the Muhasaba and the Muraqaba. And the silence, when you're still enough and silent enough, we're practicing stillness and silence. It naturally causes or provokes or evokes, is a better word, emptying of that which is other than this very beautiful silent listening that is your ruh and the embodiment of your ruh, and which will then lead naturally to being open and staying open and pure listening. Right? I'm using the word listening in a very deep, wide, contemplative, symbolic way, right? But it's a reality, right? So I pray that's helpful. So I will end here. We're at the 1 hour and 24-minute mark, and Barakallah Feek for your patience, everyone here. May Allah reward you with paradise, especially for those who are here and everyone's fallen asleep and all of that, mashallah. Hope this was helpful. Feel free to share notes with me. I'd like to see your notes on this lecture, just to see how you guys are thinking about some of the things I mentioned. So I'd be very, I would love to see if anyone made any interesting kind of diagrams and stuff about some of the things I said, inshallah. But in any case, is there anyone who would like to ask anything at this point? Or make a comment? Yes.
I kind of have a question, but I think I don't really even know what I'm asking, so I'll just say some
All
words
right.
and hopefully you can take something.
All right. Okay.
I was wanting you to speak on some like the subtlety of identity.
All right.
Because you mentioned the ego self, right? The tendencies, desires, likes, dislikes, and aversions. So I think when I think of that, I'm like, okay, I want to become less of that, like, right? But then there's like an aspect of it that you kind of need
Yes.
to take this in the world and even to like be on the path. So like, what
Yes,
is the,
yes. To maybe even finding some kind of balance, but what is that identification? How to let go of the identification, but also how to be healthy, right? Well, the original intent of these things, for example, the desires of, like, for example, hunger is a kind of need or like a desire, right, for food, right? When we're hungry, when we're actually hungry, that we appreciate more when we fast. When we're actually hungry, it is a natural desire. Any fitra'i desire serves to reinforce the integrity of the body. Right. So, in that regard, that's one way to assess and understand that your like the desire is a normal one, a natural one, a fitra'i one. Right. When our desires become excessive, it's when they begin causing us harm. One example is when we overeat. Right. This is due to the sense of an overreacting desire, hyper desire for food, like wanting more even as we're eating, right? Which can be curbed. But the effect of that is being overweight, or worst effects or bad effects are like diabetes or something, right? If you just stay with me, right? That's one way to know by intellect and by experience that we've overspent, that we went beyond natural bounds. Okay, there's also the divine bounds. Like there's divine hudud, right? So there's sacred laws. That if I have a tendency to act out a particular desire, but it's haram, then when I begin having that, I have to check that, and that's a way to curb the desire, because I'm aware this is not acceptable by God, right? So that this is another layer to managing these things. How is the identity created? That the identity is actually subtle between the interface of consciousness or pure consciousness and the body, or we can, if we want to use Islamic terms, the ruh and the vital spirit that is evoked by the connection between ruh and body, right? The vital spirit that then begins preserving, because what this identity is it is just attentiveness to this phenomena that is the body. It's like, oh wow, okay, I have this body. See that? Oh wow, I have this body. Who is this I? In Haqiqah, the I is the spirit, actually. But now I am saying, oh wow, I have a body. I'm, in other words, saying, and when I continue to say this, that I am the body. Yes, you are the body, but you're also not the body. Right? But when my identification is exclusively connected to the body, or to my thinking about myself, my projected image of myself, right? That exclusivity is ignorance. If I were to borrow the metaphysical terminology of the wisdom of Vedanta, it is considered ignorance. In the wisdom of Sufism, we would say it is a veil, it's a hijab. It's a layer that obstructs us from the unveiling of Allah's presence in us. It becomes a veil, right? When we exclusively identify. So you see how all exclusivism is ignorance. Very profound insight. So the whole purpose of actually an opening to the universal or even the universality of spirit, because the spirit is universal, because wallahi, it's the one same spirit in all of us. It's like the sun that has an infinite amount of rays that come out. All those rays are particularities or particularizations or particular modalities of the sun, but they are nothing other than the sun. But when you look at them, they're a particular ray. My ray is this, your ray is this. That's the soul. It's the human soul. You could use this image as a beautiful symbolism. And in the spiritual path, we traverse back to the source. When you touch and are fully in that source, which is the sun, if we want to use this example, that's the one same ruh that you touch. When I go back and back and back and enter presence with Allah, there's something in that experience and in that knowing that you're touching also. This is strange. Hard to get the mind around that. But we're actually touching the same place. It's the same reality. Why? Because Allah says that He created one nafs, or we were created from one nafs, nafsan wahida. But also, essentially, which is actually a projection of a more subtle reality, that is the oneness of ruh, that we came from the ruh of Sayyidina Adam. Right? That's not his ruh. Actually, I'm not going to get into terminology. It's for some other day. Or a course on Islamic metaphysics and spirituality I am intending for Hudur Institute, inshallah. So that will be some other time, inshallah. But this is the one ruh. And the very substance of ruh is pure life, or pure being, and pure knowing, or pure awareness. These are the two principles of ruh in Islamic teachings. The ruh is what gives life or existence, and also awareness or knowledge. So if you take these and you make it pure, and you take away all attributions of me being alive and all this, when you come back to pure being, that pure being that you experience somehow is connected to everyone's experience of pure being. It's the same pure being and pure knowing, which is from ruh, that is connected to what? Allah's attributes of knowing and living. Well, what do we learn? Allah is al-Alim. He is al-Hayy. These are the primordial attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the positive ones. We learn in Aqidah, which we'll actually talk about in the Islamic metaphysics course, inshallah, that I plan to make and then kind of teach online. Inshallah. So if you come back to a sense of pure awareness, you're coming back to your spiritual presence, or pure being, like we do in contemplative being. And if you take that subtly even further back, it's not yours at all, or it's not even our shared being and knowing. It's Allah's. Subhanallah. Why? Because this is His attributes. Allahul Latiful Khabir. Allah is the subtle, the all-aware. So that when you go back, like, oh, that's really subtle. That can only be subtle because somehow Allah is allowing us to borrow His subtlety. Wow. We can only know or be aware because somehow Allah is allowing us to borrow His quality of awareness. SubhanAllah. We can only be alive because somehow we are borrowing His attribute of being the ever-living. We have ultimately no share in it, but He allows participation in it. This is the more precise term. We are participating in it. We are not sharing it. That's subtle shirk. Somehow we're participating. So, subhanallah, la ilaha illallah. So I'll stop there. Was that helpful? I know I kind of went off topic, but I kind of touched those points. All right, alhamdulillah. And so part of the process is when we awaken, and this is important for you, I think it will hit home, inshallah. When we awaken to a subtle center in us, whether it's intellect from the Nafs, unconsciousness of the Nafs, to consciousness of intellect, or consciousness of intellect, or conscious intellect, mindful intellect, to heartful spirit, right? in this awakening, there's a recognition or a seeing of a limitation or an ignorance that then falls away. And in Sufi language, it's unveiling. It's a kashf, even if it's very subtle. It's a kind of awakening, is like the yaqadha, which is considered a state or a station in Sufi practice, and in the path is a kind of unveiling. Or, because if you take these words, unveiling is a discovery, as in an uncovering of something. When you discover something or when you unveil something, it's something that was already there, but it was covered. Like your veil on your head. It's covering your hair that's actually there, but it's veiled. So an underlying subtle reality is always there, but it's veiled. So ruh is there, but it's veiled by nafs. The aql is there, but it's veiled by nafs. The qalb is there, but it's veiled by aql, until the aql sinks into the heart, the qalb, and awakens to its own self, like, oh, like the thing I said, like, oh, that's awakening. And the falling away of ignorance, at least for that moment, right? From the noise of my mind and its movement to the stillness and silence of the presence of spirit. This is the work that we do and we seek to awaken with the help of Allah in spiritual retreat. The three centers of the human soul, right? The mindful intellect, the spiritual heart, and the divine secret. May this be so. Ameen. Ya Rabbal Alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.